are awake the next, but what's actually happening in the body is very subtle, whereas what's happening in one's consciousness is extremely dramatic.
Yeah.
And so I've always been mystified by that, and the only understanding of it that fits my own experience is if you posit the idea of the assemblage point, which is like an organ of perception that's outside of our physical body, by which we tune into different bands of perception. And so,
Yeah.
there's my cat. He's getting weird. It must be all the talk about astral entities. Yeah, that's how I see it. It's tuning into a different frequency, and so when you change frequency, there's that in between period, isn't there, where you're not on one bandwidth nor the other
Yeah.
bandwidths. So, and that's when all the
Mm.
noise enters in. But this is potentially this very rich area that you're
Yeah.
describing, the hypnagogic and the hypnopompic state.
Mm.
So I'm a lot of free associating here. I don't want to keep cutting you off. I just wanted to interject that the thought I had, which is the hypnopompic and the psychopomp, these two terms, they seem to share a root there. You know the term psychopomp?
I'm not familiar with that one, sorry.
Psychopomp is a shamanic kind of agent, and it's Mercury was the psychopomp. It's somebody who journeys into the underworld,
Okay.
into the realm of the unconscious.
Yep.
Christ was the psychopomp when he went down into Hades to redeem the dead.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess in some cases these experiences seem to be a kind of journey into your unconscious mind. Like especially when you have some sleep paralysis experiences can result in can bring about the lucid dreaming state. So you'll enter into a lucid dream, and I guess dreams are pretty much an exploration of your unconscious mind. So yeah, it's just interesting how just a slight change in frequency can put you in the lucid dreaming state, from the sleep paralysis state. So, and then there's also out of body experiences as well. You can also experience that, and some sleep paralysis sufferers learn to come out of an unpleasant sleep paralysis experience and into a much more pleasant lucid dream or an out of body experience or something like that. I guess you could interpret that as a sort of shift of the assemblage point, a sort of shift in frequency.
And does that come about voluntarily or just spontaneously, generally speaking?
Both. Yeah, both. But I've certainly found in my case that I'm able to have a lot more control over my sleep paralysis experiences. I'm able to, in some cases, enter a lucid dreaming state. I don't find these experiences or these entities, or whatever you want to call them, as threatening anymore. It's just interesting too how the entities seem to be. It's almost as though in some cases that you're interacting, with a part of yourself, your shadow, as Jung calls it.
So have you noticed that since working on the book and as a result of working on the book, has that actually affected your experience of sleep paralysis? Do you think there's a direct correlation between the two things?
Yeah, well, I think working on the book was a very sort of cleansing process. It sort of enabled me to get rid of all this junk, I suppose you could call it, in my mind and sort of put it down on paper. And so I guess as a result of that, having a sort of clearer mind and having sort of dealt with all that stuff, and I've sort of moved on a little bit, I suppose. I think too I've kind of maybe shut these experiences out a little bit, just because I mean, at one point I was actually doing experiments trying to induce the sleep paralysis state, but yeah, that was a bit crazy, So,
How did that turn out?
well, yeah, it worked. Basically, I'd just get up in the early hours of the morning, and then lie in bed and relax, and yeah, I'd fall into the sleep paralysis state, and then from there, I'd sometimes have an out of body experience, or I'd just remain lying there, and I'd just be receptive to all this, these voices and such. Sometimes very clear voices.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there'd be a presence in the room. At one stage, I became aware of a presence in the room. It was actually this entity seemed to be sort of sitting on my body and moving around, and I was able to open my eyes while the experience was taking place, and I could see my bedroom, like my surroundings, very clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw this sort of troll sitting on the edge of my bed right next to me, and it seemed to be unaware of my presence, and then suddenly it noticed that I was looking at it, and then it just sort of freaked out and sort of disappeared down a wormhole or something, which was that's a very interesting experience.
Was it
I
frightening?
certainly thought Sorry?
Go ahead.
Was it frightening?
Yeah.
Uh, Not so much. I don't know. It sort of seemed to be a fairly non-threatening entity. I mean, when you're in that state, you're sort of able to determine whether or not this presence is threatening. And in this case, it didn't seem to be very threatening. It seemed, yeah, it was sort of seemed to be a kind of playful entity, I suppose. But yeah, it was just interesting seeing its reaction, and this was a very, very vivid hallucination.
But is that what you
Yeah.
consider it to be? It was a hallucination?
No, that's just a useful term to use, but what I mean to say is I could see it very, very clearly. And yeah, I don't see how that could just simply be a hallucination. I think, it probably was real in some sense.
Hmm. Do you feel that something was compelling you to write this book?
Um, I'm not sure. Uh, could you sort of rephrase that question?
Well, I guess what I was getting at was the possibility that you're a channel, you're a medium, who's able to
Hmm.
receive communications from the other side, and that those whatever forces or entities that are able to communicate through you want you to communicate their existence to the world, and so they might actually be encouraging you to write this book in some way, subtle or otherwise.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a possibility. Um, I'm not sure. I don't know. Uh, it's a hard one. I mean, I guess there's no way of me knowing whether or not that was the case, but I guess it's interesting how, well, as far as I know, a lot of sleep paralysis sufferers, they seem to be kind of mediums
Hmm.
in a way. So I think they could certainly train themselves to be mediums, because they're able to reach the right state of consciousness.
Hmm. Was that something that you would be interested in?
Not really. I don't see the point of being a medium, really. Um, yeah, I don't know. You've that's a tricky one.
Well, what's your religious upbringing?
Well, I guess it was basically Christian, really. Although my dad's never been that religious. He's always believed in the existence of God and so on. And he was brought up a Christian. But um, I was also my mum's a Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist. So I've got that as well.
Mm.
But I don't really have any sort of fixed, religious beliefs, I suppose.
But you grew up believing in the afterlife.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just I've always seems to be an intuitive thing. I mean, it just makes sense to me that your consciousness would live on in some form after death. Um, I mean that. Yep.
So what, if the dead were trying to communicate through us,
Mm.
why would you think that that would be the case?
Um. Well, I think that maybe some souls, if you want to call them that, become trapped after death. Maybe you know they stay fixed to the sort of physical realm just because they're unable to move on to say some sort of higher realm or whatever.
Why would that be?
I don't know. I guess. Well, I mean, maybe they don't even know that they're dead. Um, that could be the case, I suppose.
Hmm. Some sort of attachment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I could see that happening. Yeah, you'd probably still think that you're alive, and you'd stay fixed to the physical realm, and you'd try to communicate with people that you know, and certainly if you saw someone who did notice your presence, I guess you might try to communicate with that person. And that person might be a sleep paralysis sufferer or a medium. The two of
Mm.
which are pretty much the same thing.
And have you ever felt that you received communications from dead people that you knew while they were alive?
Um, well, there have been there was one case where I felt a benevolent presence in the room, and something sort of reassuringly touched me on the shoulder, and I don't know. I sort of had the feeling that it may have been one of my relatives or something who had died a number of years ago. I don't know if that's the case, but yeah, I know I have exchanged emails with people who sleep paralysis sufferers who say that they've received visits from dead relatives while they've been in the sleep paralysis state. Like there was one woman said that she was in the sleep paralysis state, and her dead grandmother was trying to tell her that her brother was in trouble. And anyway, the following morning, she discovered that her brother had committed suicide. Um, at about the time that she received this communication. So I think there's the possibility that people might be having encounters with dead relatives and friends and so on.
And what do you think about channeling in general? Channeled material, channeled messages?
Well, I guess it depends on the medium, really. Um, I certainly don't trust a lot of these popular New Age channelers like Seth and Ramtha and those guys.
Based on the material itself, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of that stuff, and I just I don't know. It just doesn't seem to have much substance. It's just it sort of sounds impressive, and maybe some of it is a little bit inspiring, and you get carried away by it. But when it comes down to it, there's just nothing useful there. That you can use for your own development, I suppose.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on channel material?
More or less the same, and I'm just skeptical as to why discarnate entities that are so much more evolved than we are would want to communicate with us at all.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like Seth is supposed. Oh, no, sorry, Ramtha is supposed to be a 6,000-year-old Lemurian warrior or something ridiculous like that. He claims to be an enlightened being, and I talk a little bit about Ramtha in my book, and Yeah, it's